Are you tired of wonky crocheted blankets? Well, if so, you are in the right place because in this session, we are going to talk about how to start your blanket straight and keep it that way without a great big long starting chain. Because to be honest, that great big long starting chain is often where the trouble begins. I'm Suzi Quillen. I am the Empress of Yarn here at Perfectly Knotty. And with 50 years of crochet and knitting experience and 10 years dedicated to helping other stitchers improve their stitching skills and get confident in the things that they make, I want to be your crochet coach. So let's talk about 3 specific ways that a basic double crochet Afghan can get wonky. The first is right at the beginning. That great big long chain. We can lose count. Our tension gets inconsistent where some of the stitches are loose and some are tight. And sometimes we take our hook out and when we put it back in, we put it in on the wrong side and it ends up making a twist in the chain. And that's often one of our biggest struggles. So I'm going to show you a way to avoid that. And then the other 2 areas are around not being able to read our work. We're either adding stitches in the middle of the row or we're skipping stitches or we're not properly identifying the first and last stitches in the row. And then that makes your ends wobbly. So we're going to switch the camera over so I can show you as I work along how to solve some of these little niggles that make our blankets wobble. Did you grab some yarn and a crochet hook? I'm using a size J crochet hook and some worsted weight yarn. This is the brightest color I could find. Hopefully you can see that. And we're going to start at the beginning. Instead of starting with a great big long foundation chain where you can lose count and get twisted, we are going to start with a foundation double crochet. We start by chaining 3. You'll notice there is no knot in that first chain. You're going to yarn over and you are going to go into that first chain so that you are under 2 loops. Loop 1, loop 2. You pull up a loop gently, holding the beginning chain, give it a little bit of a wiggle, and you'll notice that all 3 of these loops are actually a little bit different lengths. Then you're going to yarn over, and without allowing these loops to get pulled and tightened, you're going to pull through just the first loop, and that is your chain stitch. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now you've completed your double crochet. If you take your hook out and look at your work this way, you can see your beginning chain and you can see your first double crochet. And down here at the base of that double crochet is that chain that you made. So if we put our hook back in and we yarn over, we're going to identify that location again. It's right here. It's this loop right here. We're going to go into that loop, but we're also going to find its coordinating leg on the other side so that you are under both loops of that. And again, you're very gently going to pull up a loop, and you're going to give it a little bit of a wiggle to give it some room. You're going to yarn over and pull through just that first loop to make your chain stitch. Then you're going to yarn over. And I like to hold on to that chain stitch with my thumb so I know where it is and I don't lose it. And I'm going to pull through those first two and yarn over and pull through the last two to complete my double crochet. I'm going to yarn over, and now because I'm holding it with my thumb, I know right where that chain stitch is. And I'm going to put my hook right in it. I'm going to rotate and find the other leg over here. And I'm going to gently pull it up, yarn over, and make my chain, yarn over, pull through two to complete the double crochet. So we're going to go ahead and continue doing that until, for this example, we have 10 stitches. I'm going to speed the video up, and you can pause it and watch it at your own pace. And we're going to finish that double crochet, and then we'll yarn over and enter into that chain stitch under both legs. Give it a wiggle, yarn over and pull through to make your chain, and then complete the double crochet as usual. Let's do it again. Going to yarn over and under that chain with both legs, make your chain, and then complete your double crochet. And again, yarn over, go into the chain under both legs of the chain, pull up the loop, and then make your chain in just that first loop, and then finish your double crochet. And we just keep repeating this until we have a total of 10 of these foundation double crochets for our sample here. Again, we're going to yarn over. So we count. We'll yarn over. We're going to go into that chain under both legs and pull up a loop. And then we're going to make our chain stitch. And then we're going to finish our double crochet. Okay, now we have 10 foundation double crochets. And when you're making your blanket, this is so helpful because as you can see, you have a beautiful, beautiful edge right along the bottom. You don't have that hard chain. You will always have the right number because you're going to go count them as you go. And if you're doing a lot of stitches, because a lot of times for a blanket, you're 80 or 100 stitches, every 10 or 20, and in this case we have 10, put a stitch marker in the top of a stitch. Now this way you know that as you progress across, you know this is 10. And so you don't have to go back to the beginning and recount everything every time. One of the keys that I want to talk about in this is that this particular foundation starter without the chain is going to give you more even tension. It does have stretch. So if you are making up your blanket, you can keep making this until it is as long as you want. But I want to caution you to make it a little bit smaller than you think you want. So if you want a 6-foot wide blanket, maybe you're going to make this 5.5 feet wide because it will stretch and relax out. And your project isn't growing, your yarn is relaxing, which is a very different part of the story. So that is how to start straight and beautiful as well. Isn't it lovely? So now let's talk about keeping it straight. Putting a stitch marker in the last stitch of your row and putting a stitch marker at the beginning of your row is crucial. Let's talk about stitch markers in crochet. It's something that knitters do all the time that crocheters tend to avoid, but there's no reason for that. We have these beautiful removable stitch markers, the split ring stitch markers that simply pop right into your stitches and pop out, and these locking stitch markers that lock almost like an old-fashioned baby diaper pin. I like them both for different reasons. The split ring markers are faster to pop in and out, but if I'm working on a project long term that may get moved around or in and out of a project bag or basket, I like the locking markers because they don't fall out. So we're going to use those for this example. I'm going to go ahead and set these split ring markers off to the side for the time being. And let's talk about marking our stitches and reading our work. If you are reading a pattern, it will often tell you. If you are making this up as you go, you have a decision to make. This turning chain right here, you have to decide if that is going to be your first stitch or not. In this case, I am using that as a first stitch, and I have put my stitch marker in the top of that turning chain. And this is the top right here of the first double crochet. It's really important to mark that because when you look at your work, it looks different on this side than it does on that side. Learning to read your work and know where each one of your stitches are is really important, and it's going to help you a great deal. I did mark this last stitch, and I'll show you why. If in this case, my turning chain counts as a double crochet, and I chain 3 to make my turning chain for the next row, and I turn it around, I have this marked right here so that I know that this turning chain represents this column of stitches, and I can skip over that. I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to put my stitch in the next one over here. If I wasn't doing that, I could potentially accidentally put a stitch right here at the base of my turning chain. And then if I put my stitch marker in the top of my turning chain, I added a stitch to my row. Now, if we work across our row, if we're not reading our work correctly, I often will see stitchers holding their work like this. Can you see what's happening here? Where I've pulled this over here, and then I'll see stitchers starting to put their next stitches into the side of their stitch instead of into the top of the next stitch. So let's practice keeping our stitches like this. When I was a child and learning to crochet, every single time I made a stitch, I would stop and I would lay it out. I would find where the next stitch needed to be, and I would mark it. Sometimes I would actually stick something in there so that I could remember where that was. And then I would pick up my hook and put my hook into the stitch. Now this obviously has terrible tension. See how this over here is really loose? And that right there is another place where our blankets can get wonky, is when we have inconsistent tension. Let's look at the anatomy of our crochet hook. This is the head right here. This is the throat. And this is the shank. The loops for your stitches are made and sized on the shank. If you try to make them down in here, they're going to be always inconsistent because of the shape of the throat, and they're going to be too tight for the head to go through. You want to make sure that you are sizing over here, and that's also going to help to keep your blanket consistent and less wonky. So far, we've talked about starting straight and using a foundation double crochet to start. We talked about identifying your first and last stitch, marking those with a stitch marker, and we've talked about being able to read your work and understanding where your next stitch needs to go. Another one of the ways that I see Afghans getting wonky is when we accidentally put more than one stitch in a stitch and we just are going along. And maybe our ends are lining up right, but if you learn to read your work, you can see that right here, I have 2 stitches right there in this stitch. And that's going to increase my stitches. And you cannot make that up simply by deleting one from an end. Let's work down to the end and talk about another area that makes our Afghans wobbly. And that is going to be when you're not identifying your last stitch. And then you don't put a stitch there at all. And you turn and you go back the other way and you put a stitch here. And these are not necessarily wrong ways to make your blanket. You just need to understand what is happening with your stitches, where they're going, what they look like. And you can see here how this is already making for a wobbly edge. And I'm only 3 rows in to this little sample piece. And you can see over here how even this extra stitch that is right here is pushing this edge out over here. So these are just some simple ways that you can pay attention to your work, learn to read your work, and keep your stitches straight. I hope you found that helpful. Let's go ahead and review what we just learned. The first thing that we did is we learned the Foundation Double Crochet, which allows us to avoid using that great big long starting chain. That means that we don't lose count of our stitches. That means that we don't have to keep recounting over and over. We're not getting it twisted. Our tension stays consistent. We also learned about finding our first and last stitch and using stitch markers like these to mark those to help us know where they are. And I would encourage you to use stitch markers often. Use them every so many stitches to help you keep track of where things are. They're not just for knitters. We also talked about learning to read our work and understanding where the next stitch needs to go without putting multiple stitches in a stitch or skipping a stitch unless that's what the pattern is calling for. and also not putting stitches around another stitch. These are some really super helpful ways that you're going to keep your blanket straight. And another tip that I have for you that I find people struggle with, especially when they're first learning to make large objects, is the yarn that they choose. Choosing a yarn that's right for your project is going to ensure much more success. Matching your hook to your yarn is going to exponentially increase your success. And if you'd like to learn some more about that, head over to perfectlyknotty.com/yarn-mysteries, plural, and you can sign up to get 4 videos that are going to give you some tips and some understanding about identifying the right yarn for your project. I want to thank you for joining me in this session today. I'm Suzi Quillen. I'm the Empress of Yarn here at Perfectly Knotty. Thank you.